street, isn't it? This is a really gorgeous crowd. It's wonderful to have everyone here for this very special event. I'm New York City Council Member Brad Lander, and I'm honored to get the proceedings started here so we can rename this block of 7th Avenue for the legendary Pete Hamill. We are joined by a really dynamite group of people. All of you are here, but we've got some special folks with us, so I just want to make sure to kind of recognize and say hello. You're going to hear shortly from our Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams and our New York State Assembly member Bobby Carroll. We have some wonderful members of Pete's family who are here, and you're going to hear from a few of them. Pete's wife, Fukiko Hamill, is here. Right here. Thank you, Fukiko. Pete's brother, Dennis, is here. Thank you, Dennis. Pete's brother, Brian, who took this wonderful photo that you can see in the front. His niece, Katie, is here. Thank you, Katie. Their good friend Norman Siegel, who you're going to hear from shortly, and then just an extraordinary set of others who knew and loved him. Congressman Pete King is here. Thank you, Congressman. George Broadhead, who's the president of the Society of Old Brooklynites, and we'll recognize a few others a little later. So. Oh, his sister Kathleen is here. All right, that doesn't come later. Sorry, Kathleen. Thank you. Let's hear it for all his family members and friends and everybody who came out. I also want to say a thank you to a couple of people who made this possible. Two staff people, one on Eric's team and one on my team, who really did the legwork to make this happen. Ryan Lynch from the Borough President's office. And Megan Flynn from my office, who's back here. Thank you, Megan. We want to thank the New York City Department of Transportation because they actually control the streets, and also to the NYPD for closing this block at 12th Street so we could have this great event. So thank you to all of you. Pete Hamill truly captured the grit and spirit and people of New York City like nobody else. He weaved together the tapestries of the stories of New Yorkers from every single corner of the city. As you know, grew up around the corner on 7th Avenue, started delivering the Brooklyn Daily Eagle when he was 11 years old, was a sheet metal cutter in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, just a short distance from here. Wrote and edited for both the New York Post and the Daily News and so many other extraordinary outlets. And though he worked all around the world as a war correspondent and an internationally recognized journalist, he never stopped telling the stories of New Yorkers, and especially the stories of Brooklynites. And that's why it's really so special to be here today. Pete knew, as he wrote, there's no one New York, but many New Yorks. And he showed that people from all across the city, from any neighborhood, regardless of background, how they had grown up, what religion, what country they were from, that they could share the city and move it forward. He told stories, but it wasn't only about stories. He also held power to account and demanded action. I love this quote in which he made that case for action in 1971 after riots in Brownsville, when he said, if people say nothing can be done about Brownsville, they lie. If this country would stop its irrational nonsense and get to work, every Brownsville would be gone in 5 years. Get the hell out of Asia. Stop feeding dictators. Forget about airports, SSTs, Albany malls, highways. This country can do anything. And if Brownsville stays the way it is for another year, someone sleek and fat and comfortable should go to jail. Pete did not mince words. And really, in so many ways, those words ring out to us today, right now. So that makes it just an extraordinary day to get to honor him, to get to name this street for him. You know, sometimes street co-namings honor people that were amazing heroes on their blocks, the kind of people that Pete would chronicle, but folks that no one would know. And we're lucky to have on the City Council website a place where you could go and learn who those neighborhood heroes are and learn their stories, what they sacrificed. Those are cops and firefighters and block heroes and mayors of their neighborhood and folks who did things to make New York better. This one is a little different. Everybody knows who Pete Hamill is, and for a long time people are going to know. So to me, what naming this block does is not only honors his memory, but really serves as a reminder to all of us of what it means to be New Yorkers as we walk around our streets and think about all the things that he did, all the stories he told, all the powerful people he held to account, and what he wanted for our city. So it is fantastic to be here with you all. I could not be more excited to get the proceedings started so that we can name the block. And it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, somebody who this week especially needs no introduction at all, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams.
Woo! Thank you so much, and I'm going to be brief because I really want to see the name, the street naming. But Pete's story is about opportunity and lost. When you think about a 15-year-old dropping out of high school, becoming a sheet metal worker at the Navy Yard, going overseas to defend our country, and then using those moments to receive the opportunity to be a writer. Imagine if we would have denied him that opportunity merely because of his academic achievements. We would have lost one of the great writers of our times that brought with him the amazing experience that every American should have an opportunity to enjoy, and that's being a Brooklynite. But the loss, he was there when Senator Kennedy was assassinated. Who would we have been as a country if that bullet did not carve a highway of death, not only to his physical body, but the anatomy of American history? He was there blocks away when terrorists attacked our center of trade, and we saw Americans mobilize together to show who and what we are. And so as we wrestled with the uncertainties of our country right now, we should lean into the spirit and energy of Brother Hamill. We are made up of the best stuff on earth, and that's the human race. And he signified what's great about us right here in this community. Long before we had multi-million-dollar homes, long before we were hip and cool, he was here growing up, providing a way, as so many families have done so often. And so on behalf of all Brooklynites, we're just so proud of what he represents. To his family that's here, to everyone who's coming out, and to Norman for reaching out to me, a longtime friend who stated that we needed to do this, Brad and my team that moved on this to get this street naming. This is just a great opportunity. No one would be able to walk past this block without looking up and seeing that Mr. Hamill lived here and provided us a sense of opportunity and inspiration. He wrote about everyday people, and that is what makes us great as a city. Everyday New Yorkers, everyday Brooklynites, everyday citizens. So thank you so much for coming out and celebrating this with us.
Thank you so much to our borough president. You might be hearing more from him in the days to come. And actually, one thing, Eric brings often to middle school graduations this sign that says, it's got two sides, and on one side it says impossible, and then when he flips it for the middle schoolers, it just says I'm possible. And I think, there's something about that Pete would really like today, of just like thinking about how you turn sacrifice and loss into something really powerful. So thank you. Our next speaker is somebody who, though Eric and I both love this neighborhood, somebody who not only himself grew up in it, but whose generations have grown up in it, and who now represents it as our assembly member, but whose connection to these streets and to its history are as deep as the Hamills, and that's New York State Assembly member Bobby Carroll.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Brad. And as Brad said before, generationally, my family grew up here in Park Slope and Windsor Terrace. And growing up in a large Irish Catholic family, you heard a lot about Pete Hamill and a lot about who he was. And a lot of stories from aunts and uncles about Pete Hamill. And what they thought of Pete Hamill. And some of those things I'm sure were true, and others I'm sure were legend. But what I thought most important in my own life is I remember reading Pete's memoir, A Drinking Life, and how true I felt that book was to my own experience, even though Pete could have been my grandfather. And so I thought, what better than to read just a couple of passages from that book about the day Pete landed on this corner. The new flat was only a few blocks away, but it was another descent into a harder, poorer world. 7th Avenue was a wide avenue with trolley cars of the 67 line moving in both directions. The steel wheels of those sleek green and silver streamlined cars ran on steel tracks. And what we would hear their squealing, clattering sounds through the night. Some of us heard those trolleys for the rest of our lives. The power lines were hidden in steel poles that made a deep bonging sound when we hit them with bats or pipes. From the tops of those poles, cables fed the lines and ran above the trolley tracks. Those poles and lines and the steel tracks gave the avenue the look of an artist exercise in perspective, with the diminishing lines flowing away into infinity, or its equal, Flatbush Avenue at one end of the avenue, Greenwood Cemetery at the other. In the mind of an 8-year-old, both were as far away as Madrid. Our building was 378, a tenement rising 4 ominous stories above the street. It was in the middle of the block between 11th and 12th Street, with a butcher shop on one side, of the doorway and a fruit and vegetable store called Teddy's on the right. The first day, it was a place in another country. That was Pete Hamill's first experience of this corner. We are here now. I'm sure that that young man could not have imagined this or what would happen. It's an inspiration to all of us, and it is so amazing that we were able to remember this great Brooklynite for generations to come.
Thank you so much, Bobby. We've also been joined by the president of the Brooklyn Public Library, Linda Johnson. Thank you for being here. All right, now we get to move, as I know Pete would want us to, from the politicians to actually beloved people in his life. And I'm going to first ask Fukiko Hamill to come up and say a few words. She tells me they met in Tokyo in 1984 when she was interviewing him. So I love hearing that. Fukiko, thank you so much. We're so honored to join you for this and really excited to celebrate and honor Pete with you.
Thank you, Vlad. And thank you, Borough President Eric. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy. So many people here. Pete must be so happy to see all of you today. My name is Fukiko Hamill, and better put it here. Okay. And I'm Pete's widow, and we are together for 33 years. Thank you. When we decided to marry in 1987, he didn't have a house. And he just came back from Mexico City. He was editor for Mexico News. So we gotta find a place to live. But we couldn't afford a big place in Manhattan, so we gotta go somewhere. Then he said, not in Brooklyn, no Brooklyn. So I was surprised, okay. Then we took a ride to the north, and we went to the Rockland County and go around, and I realized that he didn't know anything about suburbs. So I asked him, you don't know the suburbs? He said, I don't know the place if they don't have any murder. So we took a ride again to the north and ended up with the small town called Wallkill, and we have a farmhouse and big pond and a barn and a hut, and we just try to live there. And we are both from city. He's from Brooklyn, I'm from Tokyo. So we didn't know how to live in the country. We didn't know how to live in the nature. Then, but he started writing Drinking Life in the small hut in Walk Hill. Then also he started writing the column for New York Post. So we have to go back and forth all the time. Then he became an editor for Daily News, and he was fired. All this happened. You all remember that. Then we finally moved back to the city, but that time, that was 2006, my father died, and I had a funeral in Tokyo and came back. And I explained to him what was that, and he said, first time, I got a bury in Greenwood, Brooklyn. Wow, finally you want to come back. But, okay, but that was just a, cemetery. But we gotta buy the plot because Greenwood is such a famous, cemetery, and I don't know if you can get it. So I don't do anything. You're gonna buy it. You're gonna talk to them. So actually he did, surprisingly. So we came to the Greenwood and met the president, and president was Dennis's friend. Everything's connected, Then he said that we're gonna buy the place next to the Boss Tweed. Famous story now. So the president gave us the 3 spot, and he picked up the one. I like this one, just behind the Boss Tweed. And that's it. Then 8 years later, he got sick. He was really sick. And I took him to the NYU Langone, and he was in ICU, and the doctor discovered the acute kidney failure and cardiac arrest on the top. Both hip bones are terribly fractured. Wow. So he was there like 5 weeks in intensive care, and doctor told me that he won't wake up. Everybody thought he won't wake up, bye-bye, Greenwood. But he survived, he's so strong, he survived. Then finally came home. I was so happy. Then what he said, I wanna go back to Brooklyn. Now, again, I have to move. I don't want to, but I cannot say no for this miraculous recovery, Then what happened is we have a co-op apartment in St. John's Place, and he didn't like it so much. Then I found a very beautiful townhouse on the Prospect Place, and with big garden and balcony and all the interiors from the 19th century, and he loved the house. Then what happened is COVID hit last year. I remember it was so hard. In the spring, I had to do everything because I cannot get any help, Then he's getting weaker and weaker and losing his ability one by one. Then I know someday he gets to go, but I don't know when and how. In the summer, I invited Dennis to come for lunch that day, on the Saturday. And I went shopping for Grand Army Plaza farmers market, came home, and took him to the hospital and came back. And on the street, he fell. And that was very, moving like a movie, so it was very slow. Oh, I'm falling, he said. But I couldn't lift him up. And he broke his right hip again. So he needed surgery, but he was so weak. I worry, but I have no choice. He has to be operated. But he was not strong enough for the operation. He died August 5th. And after that, we had a very small, cozy, nice funeral for him. And wake is Duffy on the 9th Street. And Master's Holy Name, where he was older boy and his elementary school there, and that was renovated so beautifully. Then we buried him at the Greenwood finally. And I thought how good, everything he wanted. But I feel like something's missing. Then realized it. He was writing a book about his blueprint. And he was working so hard, but he couldn't finish it. And I noticed that I have a draft. His writing start from that. I can read it now. One night in the summer of 2015, I heard the 7th Avenue Charlie car metallically squealing the traffic outside my window. I didn't even have to raise the shade, look down 3 flights past the fire escape, and see it passing. There was a touring car that on the drinking bag mentioned about that in those days. And he kept vivid memory of Charlie's sound and the memory of 378 7th Avenue up there. This is his real home. He learned how to read, how to write, how to enjoy cartoons, and also he spent more time there. When Pete started talking to me about the blueprint, he was talking about 378 7th Avenue tenement, and he wanted to come home. Now he finally come home with this Pete Hamill Way at the corner. Today, I really feel Pete finally got everything he wanted. He never forget where he came from. He never forget poverty. He never forget his parents were both immigrants. Now Pete must be so happy to see this sign. Today is his birthday. If he lived, he'll be 86 years old. What a wonderful gift for Pete. Thank you very much for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fukiko, and now we'll always really think of him here and also know that he's in Greenwood, still keeping an eye on Boss Tweed, so that's good too. All right, next up we are going to hear from another legendary journalist in his own right, Pete's brother, Dennis Hamill.
Thank you, Fukiko, and thanks for taking such amazing care of my brother for all those years. You were a miracle. Anyway, this is the place that my brother Pete never forgot where he came from. It was this corner, this block, 378 7th Avenue, top floor right, Brooklyn, New York, 11215, where Pete Hamill learned to read from our wonderful Irish immigrant mother, Annie Devlin Hamill, and then began processing and distilling words and writing sentences that became stories and newspaper columns and movies and novels across 6 decades that would inform, move, and entertain this great metropolis that he liked to call, quote, the city of people who do not look like you. In all his years of success, knockdowns, and climbing back off the canvas to become one of the finest writers the city produced in the 20th century, Pete Hamill never, ever forgot where he came from. From this street, this corner, our tenement right over there, with Babe Caputo's pigeon coop on the roof, across the street from the old Ansonia clock factory, where before it became million-dollar condos, our father Billy Hamill once worked an electric appliance assembly line, and where his kids collected deposit soda bottles from the mostly black and brown factory workers to redeem Insenio's candy store that was right over there for the price of a Spalding to play stickball through the summer days and nights. This street was always the ground zero for all of Pete's work. It was here that Pete Hamill learned the idiom and voices and yearnings of the big thumping hearts of working class men and women like my mother and father, who defined the great city that was, and by the way, still is, the greatest capital of the universe. Pete broke through the glass ceiling and decided that the noble toil of civil service or a hard hat was not his calling, but when he crossed the yellow brick road of the Brooklyn Bridge to what my mom told him was the shimmering Oz of Manhattan, to go to work as a reporter, then columnist, then editor of both the New York Post and later the New York Daily News, he took with him the working class values he learned as a sheet metal worker at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the memories of my old man laboring with a wooden leg in a sweatshop, the sacrifices of my mother folding clothes in nearby Nat's Laundry, where the owner had a numbered tattoo on his arm, and my mom working as a movie house cashier in a sweltering or freezing kiosk outside the RKO Prospect on 9th Street, where all of her kids saw movies for free, and 4 of them wound up working in the movies. Pete honored the calluses on my father's hands and the blisters on his left leg stump that put rent money and food on our Formica table. He gave thanks every day for a mother who never complained, but whom he once said, quote, taught us that the road out of poverty was through the Brooklyn Public Library. When he rubbed elbows with big shot politicians, best-selling novelists, and Hollywood celebrities in places like the Lion's Head and Elaine's in Manhattan, Pete always remembered that he became a man drinking in a sailor uniform beside my father in Radican's Saloon over there on 11th Street, or up in Farrell's on 16th Street in Prospect Park West, where immigrants became Americans cheering with their American-born kids for the Brooklyn Dodgers and later the Mets, sometimes the Yankees. When asked why he always wrote about Dublin, the great Irish novelist James Joyce once said, because for me, Dublin is the world. For Pete Hamill, Brooklyn was the world. And after traveling the wider world, and living at hundreds of addresses in Laguna Beach, Los Angeles, Santa Fe, Key Biscayne, McLean, Virginia, Barcelona, Rome, Dublin, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and upstate Wallkill, and all over Manhattan, as Pete took his 7th inning stretch before his late innings of life, he bought himself a plot in Greenwood Cemetery, as Fukiko told you, a mile from this corner, only feet from Bosch Tweed, so that he could keep his eye on a scoundrel for eternity. Then Pete convinced his loving and devoted wife, Fukiko, to help pack his 20,000 book library one more time for a final move from Tribeca back to his beloved Brooklyn, to this magical place that gave my immigrant parents a new life in flight from sectarian bigotry in Belfast, Northern Ireland, back to this place that made Pete Hamill, well, Pete Hamill. Pete moved into a duplex on Prospect Place just off 7th Avenue, about a mile from this street corner that now bears his name, back to the place where he never forgot where he came from. I want to die in Brooklyn, Pete told me one day as we collaborated on one of his final projects. I wanted to come back home, which I always thought was a beautiful noun on which to end a story, because so many great tales like the Odyssey and E.T. were about people who were trying to get back home. Pete Hamill's Odyssey ended on 7th Avenue in Methodist Hospital on August 5th of last year. That too was Pete Hamill's way. He was home in Brooklyn. I am glad Pete did not live to learn that another of our brothers, John, a decorated Vietnam War hero, would die of COVID-19 out in the California desert less than a month after Pete died. It was a tough year for the Hamill clan, but hey, it was a tough year for everybody. Everybody here, everybody across the country, across the world. So today, let's celebrate the end of that terrible year. The city is open, life has cautiously returned. Our family is celebrating this honored event today. My brother John would be beaming and cheering today for Pete Hamill Way, because that was also John Hamill Way. So would Joey and Tommy, who left us before Pete and John. Those Hamill brothers are not here to add their words, but I did ask my sister Kathleen and my brother Brian to weigh in on Pete Hamill Way, that I will deliver for them as they listen in the audience here. Kathleen, who knew Pete the longest and who was probably the best writer in the family, at least Pete thought so, writes, as a young boy, Pete's love of the written word often brought him to the Central Brooklyn Public Library at Grand Army Plaza. He would stare at the inscription over the front entrance doors to this majestic building. Here are enshrined the longing of great hearts and noble things that tower above the tide, unquote. He didn't exactly know what a noble heart was, but Pete hoped someday to be one. Pete's love of writing and exploration led him to live all over the world, but his North Star always guided him back to the place of his beginnings, Brooklyn. He was our trailblazer who always encouraged the other 6 of us that we were better and smarter and more valuable than we ever thought we were. Pete was one of the most humble, unassuming, and generous persons you would ever be fortunate enough to meet. So today, Pete, we celebrate you for being our kind big brother who made us think and dream big. Your shining light has shown everyone what the, quote, longing of a great hearts and noble things really embodies. Your magical words and legacy are so honored forever by calling our childhood street of dreams Pete Hamill Way. Brian, a celebrated professional photographer and the most old-school Brooklyn street smart of the family, writes, quote, Pete's enthusiastic encouragement and a gift of a book of Henri and Cartier-Bresson's photographs, plus the dough to buy my first 35mm camera, were his generous seeds that began my long career in photography. With Pete's help and encouragement, I went from a street mug to a respected professional. Boy, I'll say. Pete not only opened the door to a writing life for me, but he also saved my life a couple of times. So I am thankful to all those who made our brother Pete's honor possible today, including Antonio Montes, who's right over here, whose idea the street naming was and who pitched it to the office of Borough President Eric Adams, who is now the front runner for mayor, and who worked with Councilman Brad Lander, soon to be our controller, and Norman Siegel, to make this lasting memorial possible. Thank you all from all Hamills. As I stand here, I think of the great New York Times columnist Dan Barry once writing, if the sidewalks of New York could talk, they would sound like Pete Hamill. Today there is a sign that reads Pete Hamill Way over this Park Slope sidewalk where Pete Hamill first stepped out into Brooklyn and his beloved city and the world that he would help change. My immigrant parents would be so honored that their firstborn American son is now a lasting part of this great city that gave them their second chance in life. Talk about an American dream. But Pete would be most honored if someday some smart but aimless Brooklyn kid who did not look like him gazed up at Pete Hamill Way, at the Pete Hamill Way sign, wondered who that guy was, looked him up, and realized that the road to a life as well lived as Pete Hamill's could start from this street corner and through the Brooklyn Public Library. Kathleen, I think that would make Pete a noble heart towering above the tide. That would be the Pete Hamill Way. I love you, my big brother, and thanks for showing all of your kid brothers and sister and a grateful city the Pete Hamill Way. Thank you all for coming.
That was really nice. Dennis, thank you. You know, there really is something very deep about the connection between New York City and the newspaper men, you know, people who chronicled it. And, you know, we think of that as just, but these folks invented it. So big thank you to Dennis. And we're also joined by Jimmy Breslin's sons, Kevin and James, who are here, who together with Pete really continued that tradition. But Dennis, I also really appreciate the idea that the folks that will continue that tradition in the future would be young women and men who see this sign and look very different than Jimmy and Pete did, but still carry that tradition forward of loving the city and telling its stories and writing about it and holding people to account. Our final speaker before we unveil the sign is not a journalist, but sure is someone who holds power to account. So please join me in welcoming Pete's good friend, civil rights attorney Norman Siegel.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to honor Pete Hamill's legacy on his birthday, June 24, in Park Slope, Brooklyn. As a kid who grew up in Brooklyn, I enjoyed and learned much from reading Pete's terrific, insightful writing. I love the documentary Breslin and Hamlin, Deadline Artists. If you've never seen it, please read it. It captures quintessential New York City characters. Boy, do we need more of them today. Pete helped me understand who I was, helped me gain a better understanding of such core concepts such as freedom, justice, equality, and fairness. He introduced me and my peers to issues that were key to a functioning constitutional democracy. The importance of freedom of the press, using skills to advocate for the poor, the marginalized, and the powerless, fighting for all the Davids when their opponents are Goliaths. When Pete passed away, I contacted Eric Adams and said we need to do something to create a lasting memory of Pete Hamill. Eric agreed, and here we are today at the unveiling of Pete Hamill Way. I envision the next time I go to Coney Island, I get a hot dog at Nathan's, perhaps with friends or our family. I will pass by Pete Hamill Way and explain to them who Pete Hamill was, how he was important to me, my generation, New Yorkers in general, and how we need to remember this legacy as a man who did not hesitate, and I might add, very effectively, to speak out and educate us. I want to say to Fakiko and Dennis and the Hamill family, we will always remember Pete in very positive ways. He was thoughtful, he was inspiring, and as one of the speakers said before, he embraced the best qualities of New York City. I want to thank Eric Adams and Brett Lander and their staff members, Ryan Lynch, Stefan Ringa, Megan Flynn, and others. Yes, give the staff people an applause, please. For making the idea of honoring Pete Hamill become a reality. It is indeed an honor to be here today. Thank you. Proclamation. The Honorable Eric Adams.
So on behalf of all Brooklynites, I salute the memory of William Peter Hamill Jr., a journalist, novelist, essayist, columnist, and editor for the New York Post and the New York Daily News that captured New York City's politics and sports and the particular pathos of its crimes. And today, as we pay tribute to this special and respected son of Brooklyn, born and raised in the Park Slope community, who was employed at the New York Post, the Daily News, and the Village Voice, the New York Newsday, I acknowledge him for serving as editor of the Post and later as editor-in-chief of the Daily News. I applaud his extensive journalistic pieces published in the New Yorker, Esquire, Playboy, Rolling Stone, and other periodicals, and for publishing 2 volumes of short stories, The Invisible City, a New York sketchbook, and Tokyo Sketches. I commend him for writing about the wars in Vietnam, Lebanon, and Northern Ireland, and reporting on America's urban protests of the 1960s. I recognize he produced 10 novels, and published more than 100 short stories in newspapers. I laud him for writing about New York City's underclass and racial division, most notably in an essay for Esquire magazine, Breaking the Silence. I appreciate him for writing about boxing, baseball, art, and contemporary music, which earned him a Grammy Award. I acknowledge his life of service to New York City and our borough residents, and most importantly, I acknowledge he was a proud Brooklynite. Now, therefore, I, Eric L. Adams, President of the Borough of Brooklyn, do hereby give this proclamation Thursday, June 24th, 2021, William Peter Hamill Jr. Day in Brooklyn, USA. Thank you very much.
Well, you know what we're going to do now actually is just let's take the picture while we get everybody under the sun. You want?